The topic tonight is the hippies, an understanding of whom we must, I guess, acquire or die painfully. We certainly should make considerable progress in the next hour because we have with us a professional student of the hippies, as also someone who is said to have started the whole Beat Generation business, and finally a hippie type who can correct us ever so gently, please, if we are wrong. Mr. Louis Yablonsky is a sociologist who studied at Rutgers and took his doctorate at New York University and teaches at San Fernando State College in California, where he is chairman of his department. Mr. Jack Kerouac over here became famous when his book On the Road was published. It seemed to be preaching a life of disengagement. Mr. Ed Sanders is a musician, a poet, and a polemicist. He is one of the Fugs, a widely patronized combo. He has published 4 books of poetry and has vigorously preached pacifism for a number of years. I should like to begin by asking Mr. Sanders whether we have serious terminological problems. For instance, are you a hippie, Mr. Sanders, and if not, wherein not?
Well, I'm not exactly a hippie. I mean, I have certain sentiments for that, quote, hippie movement, unquote. I would say that I'm different from the hippies in that I would have a more radical political solution to the problems of this part of the century. And I have my roots more strongly in, say, the classical tradition and in poetry and literature, rather than in dope and street sex.
This you think...
and you published that magazine called what?
Called Gutter Expletive, a magazine of the arts.
Well, now, do I understand from this that we are supposed to make the inference that the hippies don't have a highly developed political schedule, a highly developed political ideology?
Is that the problem with the terms like hippie is that they have a definition foisted on them by the media, and that the word hippie has been limited by the necessities of the type of journalists that promote it. And you know, you can't rely on the name hippie to include a human being, you know, everything about a particular human being. You know, so it's a bad term, I think, because it has no meaning. You might think of hippopotamus, and I mean, you know, it's like, it has no other connections, spiritual and emotional, like, say, the Beat Generation title had. You know, it had other implications. But the word hippie, you immediately think of, you don't have any good connections.
I define a hippie as generally a young person in several categories. There's kind of a priestly type. I would include Allen Ginsberg and Tim Leary and individuals like that in that category. People searching for some loving solutions to society's ills, trying to tune into the cosmos, whatever that means. We can explore that. Generally using psychedelic drugs, and then there's a whole cadre of individuals whom I've termed novices, who are attempting to achieve a certain transcendental state. Then there's a lot of teeny bopper kids who are sort of hanging on. Then there's some ancient folks like Kerouac here who... Why couldn't you keep quiet while I was talking? I'll keep quiet when you talk.
Yeah, yes, that's fair enough, isn't it?
What?
I think that's fair enough, your request.
You said cadre.
Well, I'm sorry.
Spanish
I
word.
apologize. My semantics aren't...
And I showed my thumbs down to Ginsberg over there in the back.
Oh, he's a nice fellow.
Yeah, we'll throw him to the lions.
Well, what is it that that in your judgment distinguishes the hippie movement from, for instance, or simply a routine radical political movement?
No, I interrupted your sentence. Sentence.
Yeah, I say what distinguishes the hippie movement from simply an orthodox radical say,
Nothing.
Adamite movement.
Adamite?
Mm,
You
there
mean
was a
Adam? Adam and Eve or atom?
Adam. As in Adam and Eve.
What's an Adam and Eve? What's Adamite? Where they all wear their hair long, layers, in caves?
Yeah, and sort of back to nature and
Well, that's all right.
exclusive concern for
They might
one's
have
own
to in due time
pleasure.
after the Adamite bomb.
Hey, that was good, wasn't it?
Good all the time, boy.
Give that man a drink. Now, Jack, Mr. Kerouac, what I want to ask is this. To what extent do you believe that the Beat generation is related to the hippies?
Oh, they're
What do they have in common? Was this an evolution from the one to the
They're
other?
just the older ones.
Yeah.
See, I'm 46 years old. These kids are 18. It's the same movement, which is apparently some kind of Dionysian movement in late civilization,
Hmm.
and which I did not intend any more than I suppose Dionysius did, or whatever his name was. But although I'm not Dionysius the Areopagite, I should have been.
Yeah, that's the point, yeah.
No, it's just a movement which is supposed to be licentious, but it isn't really.
Well, now, licentious in what
The
respect?
hippies are good kids. They're better than the Beat. The Beats, see, Ginsberg and I, and, well, Ginsberg, boy. We're 40, we're all in our 40s,
Mhm.
and we started this, and the kids took it up and everything. But a lot of hoodlums, and communists jumped on our backs.
Mhm.
Well, on my back, not his.
Mhm.
Ferlinghetti jumped on my back and turned the idea that I had that the Beat generation was a generation of beatitude and pleasure in life and tenderness. But they called it in the papers Beat mutiny, Beat insurrection. Words I never used.
Mhm.
Being a Catholic, I believe in order, tenderness, and piety.
I think there's, in early 67, going back to around, I suppose, 64 or 5, there were a lot of people trying to kind of return to sort of an Indian style of life or relate to the land differently, trying to love each other and communicate, be more open with each other. And I think recently it's taken a turn in a violent direction. A lot of responsibility, I think, is due to drugs like methadone, the amphetamines, and perhaps the overuse, because it's been around for quite a while now, of drugs like LSD.
How about the herring?
What is herring? Is that kind of a drug?
It's a cherry herring.
No.
Kerouac still
Sour
on,
cream
is
and
out
herring.
of style. He's still on alcohol, which is,
I'm on
there
alcohol
are
and
other
another drug
drugs now.
How about that, Miss Sanders? Is that out of style?
Well, you mentioned misanthropic and objectionable. I think that
Misanthropic.
many of the so-called misanthropic elements of this generation are due to the war, and that you have a surly generation of draft-eligible but literate and articulate people who are confronted with the hideous probability of having to go to an Asian land war, and that so they have to go to war, and they're faced with this looming, gloomy future, and that rather than die in Vietnam, they'd rather prepare themselves to articulate a lifestyle in the streets and in the open that really reflects something they really want to do, rather than this other thing you have to do later on that they don't really believe in and they will do because push comes to shove. Most kids go to war.
A lot of us have heard that the restlessness of so much of American youth, which has contributed to the growth of the hippie movement, has to do with the trauma of Vietnam. But then all of a sudden, a while ago in France, what seemed like the entire student population exploded even though that particular provocation was singularly, in fact conspicuously, absent.
I think in the United States, the hippies, with all the tantamount difficulties of defining them, come from the middle, upper classes, upper socioeconomic situation. And these are generally people who have tasted the best that American society seems to have to offer. They have access to all the goodies, and they're turned off by it. They feel that it's kind of a plastic society. There's no room for political change. I'm talking about the pure hippie. The pure hippie isn't particularly involved in politics. He's sort of retreats from that. He's withdrawn from it. And he's involved in, I mentioned the term cosmic consciousness before. There is an experience one seems to get under LSD that a lot of people talk about as putting them in touch with all things, with all people. And there's an effort, kind of an extremist effort at love that seems to dominate the hippie scene, and a retreat from politics.
I refer back to Count Leo Tolstoy, who wrote War and Peace, you know, Leo Tolstoy, who said that at one time the hourglass, that the sand is coming down from one top of the hourglass down to the other, and that will be the end of war. I think that war will be over fairly soon. Although I don't know for sure. That's what Tolstoy said. And he was the guy who taught Gandhi and Thoreau.
Yeah.
Henry David Thoreau.
Yeah. Told him a lot of foolish things.
No, but I didn't get the full context of your question.
Well, the full context of the question is, are a significant number of Americans, precisely at an age when we enunciated the Great Society,
Great Society,
i.e. the society that was actually going to introduce politics
As
as
far as I'm
relevant in
concerned,
everything, are they disillusioned, and does this have to do with the growth of the hippie movement?
in the first place, I think that the Vietnamese War is nothing but a plot between the North Vietnamese and the South Vietnamese, who are cousins, to get jeeps in the country. And as for...
They're not very good plotters, are they?
Well, they got a lot of jeeps. I think they're pulling the wool over our eyes, and we're little American lambs.
They turned out to be more expensive than Sears Roebuck Jeeps.
Yes.
Didn't they?
But that's what I really think there.
When you attempt to essentially peacefully gather together to press a point about a war or about a freedom or about freedom of journalism, that when you're confronted with people like like the Soviet leaders and like the leaders in Chicago, namely Mayor Daley and Mr. Stahl and Mr. Barger of the Chicago municipal office, that you're confronted with essentially the same position. You're allowed, you're clubbed, you're maced, you're gassed, you're freaked, zapped, pushed over. If you're an old lady, you're thrown through a plate glass window. If you're a cripple, you're thrown against a street light. If you're a peaceful, long-haired, loving protester, you're smashed and knocked down. If you're a cameraman, you're bricked and your camera's destroyed, and your blood is splattered all over you. I mean, it's a nefarious scene, and there's all kinds of correlations. And what the lesson you would draw would be to prepare yourself, and in the sense of, if you're nonviolent like I am, and if you believe in pacifism, you will attempt to create a body of love and light, so that thing can't happen, that there'll be so many loving people there that you will have a festival of life and all its attributes, and you can do that by praying together, by loving together, by Alan was singing Aum in the streets, which is the Hindu benevolent word, and by getting together and creating love, I think it's a great force, and at least in allowing you to demonstrate in the United States against Daley, who is like it's Al Capone, I mean, it's,
Yeah, sure.
Beware of false prophets who come unto you dressed in sheep's clothing, and underneath they are ravening wolves.
What were you saying, Mr. Kerouac?
I said there are people who make a rule of creating chaos, so that once the chaos is underway, they can then be elected as the people who take care of the chaos.
The reason that
And
I
my
think all this
father,
is
my mother, and my
interesting-
sister and I have always voted for Republican. Always. We voted for Hoover. for
Have you no
God's sake.
ambition?
I was 6 years old voting for Hoover. Kicking
He's
autumn
on
leaves
your
around the
side.
gutters, you know.
Well, see, the only thing that the type of police state oppression forces on us is the next convention we're going to have to take 10,000 of us and run naked through the streets with smeared with strawberry preserves or something. I mean, you know, it's got,
Maybe I can lick you.
my wife maybe. No, but I mean, yet I say, you know, I mean, it's, you know, they force you into an incredible position in the world when you want to protest or you want to make your voice known in a benevolent way, and yet at the same time you're pushed and clubbed, you know, and
You make yourself famous by protest.
that's not, who does? Not
You.
me. No, why? Make myself famous by singing smut.
I made myself famous by writing songs and lyrics about the beauty of the things that I did and the ugliness too.
You're a
But
great
you make
poet, I
yourself
will
famous
admit.
by saying, down with this, down with that,
No.
throw eggs at this, throw eggs at that.
I
Take
hope
it
not.
with you.
That's not what I want.
I cannot use your abuse, you may have it back.
Okay, you're a great poet, and we admire you. In fact, it's your fault that we're...
Now, Mr. Yablonsky, in your book, you list what you call the psychedelic creed, and I take it that these are articles of faith to which most hippies would adhere.
Those creeds are kind of summarizations based on several hundred interviews with people on the scene,
Right.
and what they say. It's not especially
Yeah,
what I say.
I know, yeah, it wasn't handed out in some tablet, but you infer
Right.
it. Yeah, okay. Now, then you say, drugs are a key to the God in men. Drugs are sacraments for a greater knowledge of the universe. Drugs are a vehicle to a cosmic a consciousness. Is a considerable consensus on this point?
Well, a lot of people in the movement do take the position that the way that every man is a god, and it's a very individualistic kind of a movement. Each individual should be free, in quotes, to do his own thing, whatever that may be. It's rather anarchistic, actually, and I think here are the seeds of its
Well,
failure.
how are standards arrived at in hippie culture on the basis of which one decides whether somebody's thing is
Teacher?
insufferable?
Teacher?
Well, I just want to finish this, and then I saw someone assaulting someone at a commune up in Northern California, and I started to intervene, and several people rather gently said, "Well, he's just going through his violence bag. Let him do his own thing." And I said, "Well, what if he kills him?" You know, and
Good point.
their position was everyone should be free to do their own number. I don't share this view, but this is part of the
Do
philosophy.
you endorse that particular impulse
Well,
of Sanders?
I've seen a lot of communes, and I've never seen a commune that really tolerated violence. I think that's one of the chief characteristics of a community of free people, that they're there to get away from violence. And when there's like drug-induced violence or other types of violence, it's generally, in my view, in my experience, it's generally quelled.
You mean kibbutzes?
Well, that's one part of it. That's one type of
Except when the Arabs
commune,
attack?
every commune I went to, I saw some degree of violence and anarchy and chaos, and they would tell me that about another one, and I went to around 4, and the last one was it was way back in the hills, and I was rather frightened because there was a rather high degree of violence. There were a lot of people freaked out on drugs. It was a rather chaotic scene.
And how do the victims of this violence characteristically react?
Ouch.
Hurt?
like most people do.
But they have no mechanism to which to appeal, correct?
Right. This was one of the few times in my life I wish there were police around.
There goes the black flag of anarchy.
Well, would you say that their leaders are, quote, spontaneous, they're not pushy leaders who are self-appointed, they're selected by hippie constituents because they are, quote, spiritual centers? How are they selected, and what authority, once selected, do they have?
Well, the theme, the philosophical theme would be that certain individuals are purer, more loving, more tuned in to nature and other people than others, and that people seek them out as
Yeah, well, what
leaders.
authority do they have?
They deny having any and claim to have no power.
So that a victim in one of these situations would get nowhere by addressing his complaints to the, quote, leader, because the leader would have no authority to redress those grievances.
Well, there's no tight organization.
Are we talking about reality or not? I mean, you know, I've never seen such a situation where
Is that capital R?
he's talking about
Well, he's been in
remote
4
communes.
communes. He's written a book
Well,
about it. He's observed
indeed,
it with
but
his
he's
own
talking
eyes,
about a type of, say, a desert commune, or a commune that's isolated from the fabric of the police fabric. Now, I'm familiar with the communes in New York City, for instance, where you're constantly reacting and relating to the so-called other world, you know, with it, and you know, you're really you're really never without police protection. You know, everybody usually have a phone or something.
Well, up in Big Sur,
Yeah,
and
well,
places like that, you're,
indeed.
you know, people
But the
are,
point
are
is that
wiped out.
there's no.
Well,
you see, I think we're emphasizing violence, and it
Is it all
doesn't
right-
have
is
to
it
be.
all right
That's
for-
it. And I was at Big Sur.
You've written a book
When
called
were you
Big Sur.
there, Jack?
Oh, get off of it. I lived
You
alone.
there lately?
I lived with a mule up there.
Well, is it okay for a hippie to call the police when he needs help, or is that
course.
considered anti-something?
Sure, you got some snuffer gonna get you. You say you call the police. Of course, why not? I mean, you know, you're attaching all these theoretical tags. That's the problem with using the word hippie, in that it's a tag. You know, you can't say they're anarchistic to the degree they all have middle class equipment, a lot of them, and they can plug right back in. You know, it's easy. Gee, let's see. You know, police. Yeah, right. You dial. You know, I mean. You know, 911.
Well, isn't one of the goals of a lot of people on the scene to turn off all middle class values and to tune into some other sense of reality?
Nixon
other
is the
existence?
middleman. Man for the middleman,
Well-
and Agnew.
You know, I think the Leary's. You know,
Especially-
what we're really involved in is the word. What the definition of the word "drop out." You know, and I think that the thinking quote hippies are involved in a new type of a new interpretation of what dropping out means. It really, you know, like you naturally retain some connections with, say, the police and the hospital and the fire department.
But
and
isn't
the
this a
legal
negative
aid and the medicals and
retention? You know, the things your parents laid on you. And
I'm glad they laid
establishment.
hospitals on me. I mean, you know, it's like
Hey, Ed? Huh?
Huh?
You hear me, Ed?
Sure.
I was arrested 2 weeks ago, and the arresting policeman said, "I'm arresting you for decay." What the devil was that?
I assume he was able to prove it.
This may be the start of a new movement.
decayists.
Mr. Yablonsky, I'm interested in what kind of a future you see for the hippie movement.
Well, I think a lot depends on American society. If it becomes more open and less plastic, more loving, and a lot of the rigidified institutions that have developed, like a lot of our families and whatever, if things begin to change, there won't be any need for people to react in a rather extreme form, looking for love. It will be found in the regular social system, and in that case, it will disappear.
It may very well grow to the extent that we all encourage intellectual irresponsibility and B, personal irresponsibility. It may very well be that the psychologists are correct who say that precisely what has encouraged the hippie movement to become irresponsible is a complete lack of leadership. It may be that when we start writing books about them, we ought even to muster up the courage to say certain things they ought not to be permitted to do. Yes, question over there.
Would any of you regard the hippie movement not only as a reflection of the inadequacies of the society as a whole, but also as a manifestation of the psychological inadequacies of the individual hippies themselves?
Yes, sir.
Well, I think there's such freedom within the framework of the movement that people that society would classify as, in quote, psychotic, are allowed to do their thing, and they live and eat and are taken care of by others and appreciated. In fact, to a great extent, I think this is one of the interesting facets of the hippie movement, that there's a humane approach to people who society would label in some extreme fashion. And so there are a lot of young people who are who don't make it through the usual channels, who find a life for themselves on the hippie scene.
But the question itself poses a methodological challenge, doesn't it? Because it's hard to establish by mutually agreed on means what normalcy consists in, right?
Right.
I mean, maybe Mr. Sanders is normal for all we know.
Maybe I am too.
Well, if people get nude, as Ed described, and put strawberry jam on, I think he said strawberry, and run through the streets, as you know, if hundreds do this, it's kind of a movement. If one guy does it, he'll get arrested in a moment.
Did you want to comment on that, Mr. Kerouac? Sorry.
I was asking why he wants followers.
Who?
Him.
Mr. Sanders?
Abramowitz, or what his name is.
Don't be anti-Semitic with me. I happen to be Jewish.
That's
My
the
name is
classic answer,
Jablonski.
isn't it?
Yeah.
What is the classic answer?
To call you by your name.
Well, why'd you call me Abramowitz? I don't know.
Well, what is it?
Jablonski.
Oh, yeah, Blonsky. Well, let's see.
Hey, you didn't mean to be rude, did you, Mr. Kerouac? Come on now.
No. I thought I
So we
forgot his
apologize.
name.
Now, did you want an answer to that question?
Which question?
Well, the question, obviously not. So we
Yes,
have a lady
I'll
over
answer the
here.
question over there about the methodological.
It's about emotional paraplegics. That's what
No, what was the question you want
Let's
me to
get another one.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll answer.
This lady's been waiting.
I
very
can
patiently.
answer that one, too. You know. I can answer any question.
Here's one for you. Now, wait a minute.
As far as the hippies and the people who live in the communes and those who work in the banks, do they plan on making it a lifetime occupation? Like, are they just going to sit down and watch the world go by? Because they don't
Well,
really do anything.
That's not what they're doing. Well, everybody sits down a part of their time and watches the world goes by.
But the people who live in communes, what are they doing? Are they adding
they're
anything
living.
good to the...
It's called. It's like there are certain religious movements, like the Brethren or the Quakers, who don't believe in proselytizing, but live by example. And you'll never get any queries from the Church of the Brethren to join their belief. But at the same time, they try to live an exemplary life, and that's probably the main motivation behind a commune life. You know, rather than say, "Come here and join us," they would show an example and hopefully accrue.
Do you plan to be a fug when you're 50?
I'm 50.
Yeah.
I'm 50. I plan to be an emotional paraplegic, smoking peace herbs.
Neurasthenic psychotic.
You know.
You think that would be an improvement, Mr. Kerouac?
No, I'm just kidding. You said psychotic when you said...
I think that's a good
neurasthenic.
point. How about this youth business? Why should this particular impulse evanesce? Why, when you get to be around 30 or 35, you think, oh, I'm going to put my youth behind me and go to work for the First National Bank?
Well, a lot of the young people who are in this movement, they look up and they see their 50-year-old father who did everything, has all the goodies, 2.8 cars and 3 houses and whatever, and he's kind of miserable and he's not communicating with his wife and whatever, and they say, well, if I go to the right schools and do all these things, this is what's going to happen to me. Well, I'm going to try something else. And I think this is the hippie movement is partly this, kind of a social experiment.
Partly a social experiment that understands the likelihood of its own futility. Put it this way, will anybody be thinking about the hippies 10 years from now other than in the sort of a hula skirt sense? Just something that happened.
Well, no, by then the hippies will be in the command generation, and all the pot-smoking law students and all the young legislators who are introducing legalization of pot bills and all the young professionals who are, quote, turned on and articulate and who are aware of Mr. Kerouac, Mr. Ginsberg's great contribution to American civilization.
I'm not connected with Ginsberg. In other words, you put my name next to his.
Okay, Mr. Kerouac's contribution to American civilization, those people will be, quote, the command generation and hopefully retain some of the humane attributes.
Command generation?
Well, that's what they're going to be. That's what Time magazine calls it. I don't call it.
Anyway,